You can now stream the forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana free on Tubi TV, which is available on Fire Stick, Roku, iOS, and Android. Hello friends, we are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. Here at Forbidden Knowledge News, I've always taken an unbiased, open-minded, and responsible approach to presenting my own theories, and the views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. Conspiracies are definitely fun to discuss in a responsible way. All that being said, enjoy this episode. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is RamX. First, be sure to check out the Forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana. That's on Tubi and multiple streaming platforms. Get yourself a Rokfin premium membership, rokfin.com/FKN Plus. Get access to our premium content. And if you listen to the podcast through any audio platform, listen through Spreaker. We're booking guests for January. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome RamX. He is a researcher and curator of 40 and Wins, which is a collective of data professionals exploring the most credible evidence and theories surrounding events described as paranormal. Ram, welcome. How you doing?
Doing well, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for coming on. I'm really looking forward to this. We're going to take a deep dive into your research surrounding the realms and intelligences that seem to exist within an ecosystem beyond our perception. And this is definitely one of those topics where the more I learn, the more questions I have. And there's so much to this to discuss in a limited time. But this is your first time on. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what brought you to work in this high strangeness realm.
Sure. I'll give a quick recap. I tend to think my story isn't the most interesting thing about this, but it's good to know where people are coming from when it comes to the phenomenon, for sure. So I started out around 2019, and I was just kind of home during the pandemic. And like a lot of people, I had a lot of free time on my hands. So I went down the UFO rabbit hole. And for me, it just started with the 2019 article where the Navy actually admitted that the Tic Tac encounter was real. And when I read that article, I thought, this is BS. I thought the Navy was trying to get money for something. But it's still interesting, especially during a lockdown. So I thought, oh, I'll look into this some more. And what I found was that the Tic Tac encounters were real. I think a lot of information out there is still coming out about that incident that has verified it, beyond all doubt. Both the radars, the witnesses that were in the air, the pilots, and the technical equipment caught it. And I see that Arrow and some other lazy debunkers are going back and trying to say that it was parallax or this or that. But it's good to remember that, like Commander Tim Galladay, Rear Admiral, he is now retired. So he was an admiral during that incident. And I just heard him say this at the Soul Foundation, that he was an admiral during that incident. And that video of the Tic Tac was sent around to a number of the lower rear admirals from the high command, the 4-star.
Mm.
So he sends it out to all these 1-star admirals and says, "Is this any of your guys' stuff, this Tic Tac?" And if it is, it's screwing up our exercises, and we may have to shut down. And these exercises are cost millions and millions of dollars. Like it's no joke to have something in the middle of it that would shut it down. And they all said, no, that's not ours. And then they come in for work the next day, and that email has been removed from their machines.
Mm.
So it's kind of funny that now there's still an effort to debunk that, because it seems like that was the extraordinary evidence case. The witnesses, David Fravor, Commander Dietrich, who were all pilots during that encounter, gave very detailed accounts. So that case was what I would call the extraordinary evidence case. Carl Sagan used to say, extraordinary claims take extraordinary evidence. And that case had all of the extraordinary evidence that I needed, as well as people who were aware of it within the government. So I tried to talk to a few people that I knew from, working in federal government, and they wouldn't really tell me much about it, but they did say that there was something there.
Mm. Now, you may have had some previous work experience that was beneficial for you in this research, right?
I have, in terms, I have done some technology research as well as some government research. I once was in the military. I don't think that those things are terribly relevant to the phenomenon, but
Mhm.
it does define my approach. So I do understand why people would be curious.
Right on. Let's talk about our progression of understanding when it comes to this phenomena. When I first started, like many, looking towards the skies, to little green men coming on tin cans to come and try and experiment on us and stick things in our butts and all the classic alien lore that you hear. But like many in this field, the more you dig into it, the more layers you uncover. It seems that there is a much deeper story than just little green men coming from outer space. There seems to be a level of intelligence that surrounds us at all times, that has an access to our consciousness, and consciousness seems to be the key ingredient in this whole phenomena. How it fits together, we're still kind of learning all of that, but I'd love to hear your progression as to the understanding that you're now at as opposed to where it was when you first started.
Well, kudos to you because you're a lot further ahead than where I was when I was starting out. So yeah, that I think you're talking about the what I would call the advanced class of UAP, and I've started to refer to it as that because going back to like my story and how that all fits in, you find out one UFO is real, and it's going to take you down I think a very specific research path. For most people, that's extraterrestrial. I thought I was looking at extraterrestrials when I first started the research, and everyone does. There's still, I would say, 50% of the UFO research community that is thinking we're dealing with extraterrestrials. I don't know, to be clear. I'm not sure if they're extraterrestrial or not. As you point out, the whole thing gets a lot weirder, and it starts to really become a question of what is reality. And I think what you're diving into right now is the big reason for disclosure. It's a very or lack of disclosure, I should say. It's a very relevant discussion we're having because this is the moment. You can't tell people UFOs are real without telling them that they live in a reality that they had no awareness of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to affect all of our institutions.
Mhm.
The UFO field, it ends up being revelatory because you dive down the rabbit hole of UFOs and you go, wait, UFOs are real? How did I not know this?
Mhm.
That was my first question. How do I not know this? How does everyone not know this? But I think you find out that there is this great deception that's
Mhm.
happening on two levels. You have both the NHI, who are attempting to maintain secrecy, and then you have the government aiding them in maintaining secrecy. And
100%.
then there's the rest of us who don't know why.
Yeah, that's it, man. I'd like to get into your research data points, the primary areas that you focus on your website and that your team sifts through.
Sure. Yeah. That's I think something that defines us, it separates us a little bit, is that we have a standardization of data collection, which I thought was very important, especially when you go back into some of these cases and you can pull out scientific data. You can pull out like what was the electromagnetic frequencies that appeared during that time. So that's a big one that we look for, what waves were appearing and when in the encounter. And then as far as validating cases, we don't take any single witness case as rote. It doesn't mean that I don't believe a single witness. Most paranormal and UAP cases happen to single witnesses, but the reason that we don't add them into our data is because we want a clean data pool.
Mhm.
We want to make sure that we're dealing with real cases when we go to identify patterns. And there's just no way to do that if you start adding single witness accounts. There's no way to validate it.
Mhm.
So we only wanted to work from cases that were validated. And we looked at things like date and time. We looked at things when it comes to UFOs, we looked at shape of the craft. Is there a pattern to shape of the craft? Is there a pattern to geolocations, which there is latitude, especially, is a primary determinant of that. Those are things that we looked at in UFO cases, more like hardcore nuts and bolts stuff. As time went on, and John Keel has kind of been our, spiritual godfather in this. And, his work initially said that real seasoned investigators will focus on the person who was affected, the contactee, the percipient. And as time has gone on, that has become a greater focus of our research. Who are you? You know, what were you doing at the time? What were you thinking at the time? Is this your first encounter? Does your family have encounters? There's so many questions that I
Mhm.
think become far more relevant, and that's, an interesting analogy for almost the whole research that you point out. Like we start out in this nuts and bolts way, and I do think that that information is very relevant, and we have to tie it back in to this, what I would call intelligence gathering. There's really no other way to say it. And your intelligence gathering, and then you're adding that into your data, and now you have a wider data pool.
Mhm.
And we could do that without hesitation. Whereas, like a physicist or a material scientist they're even balking at taking David Fravor and Alex Dietrich's witness testimony. They're
Mhm.
saying, no, that video is parallax. Well, if you think the video is parallax, what did the witnesses see? And they'll never say, oh, the witnesses didn't see anything.
Mhm.
They just don't square the circle. That's how they deal with it.
Let's start by dissecting some of the nuts and bolts aspects that you were just talking about. You mentioned geolocation. This is very interesting. What did you find out about the similarities and locations of sightings and experiences?
Yeah, I think that is an important find. We took all of the UFO sightings going back to like 1998, the public, so the New Fork database, and we had a cleaned up version of that, and then we cleaned it up even further and added there was geolocation that was added to the set that we had. So we had coordinates, we had latitude and longitude, as well as all those other features that they normally give at a UFO report. So that would be date and time, shape of craft, and anything else. And then we standardize those. So we said, okay, is date the most determinant characteristic? Is time the most determinant characteristic? And the way I went about doing that was to take the data from the best data that I had was from 2000 to 2005 in like California, a massive data. And you want to be working with the most data you have when you're trying to create a prediction algorithm. So then I attempted to create a prediction algorithm that would predict the UFO sightings in 2006. And because I had all that data, I could just use it to both create the algorithm and then test it. And I got the algorithm up pretty high to over 70%. And it could predict UFO sightings in 2006 based on the previous data. Then I started removing features. So I removed things like date, removed things like time, removed things like shape of the craft, and check the accuracy of the prediction again. And the accuracy of the prediction is primarily determined over 70% by latitude.
Interesting.
It is. I think that moves the conversation because we have to add that in now to our larger of why this is happening, our larger ideas of why this is happening. So, what we were talking about before, how important the person is and how important their characteristics are, now we also have to add latitude into that somehow, right?
You also mentioned electromagnetics earlier. This seems to be a huge factor that plays into everything. And you just mentioned the location. So if latitude is a determining factor and electromagnetics, we have two data points that we can look at, but how can we connect those in any way? Have you been able to do so?
Yeah, great points. So I think we have gone down the road with that connects those data points, but it's to more than just latitude and consciousness because when we talk about those features, well, let I think the person is more important. There are more characteristics going on with the person than latitude, but when you create the right formula in the person and then put that person in the right location, particularly when it determines latitude, the odds of the encounter go way more up. So this ends up being sort of a sliding scale, right? And if you imagined having four beakers on a table, and when they get heavy enough, the table turns over, and that's an encounter. So we have to keep filling the beakers with different things. And one of those things would be latitude. Another one would be certainly family history. As you know, I'm sure from your research, you know that family history is a massive determinant in terms of whether or not you're going to have a paranormal or UFO encounter. So that's obviously genetic. That's there's no other thing that gets passed from one person to the next, other than your genes. So that's interesting. And then you combine that with also their mental state. And one of the things that, and like I said, this is a sliding scale. So if you have one of these things in mass, like you're absolutely genetically predisposed to paranormal encounters and you're in the exact right location, you may have an encounter. But maybe if four or five of these other things reach a certain level, you also may have an encounter. It could be anywhere. And one of those things is your mental state. And they find that people who are in transition, people who are in a liminal state, I know that is a appropriately oft used word in this field, liminal, and people who are in changing jobs, in a divorce, just got out of a relationship, changing locations, moving houses. These are things that seem to bring on a paranormal encounter in certain people more.
Yes, we're getting deep to some of the things that I'm really looking at right now. I talk to a lot of people, and that's where I base my data points off of. I think that the witness and experiencer's testimony is one of the most important data points we can have because they are the ones having this experience. Even though everybody's experience is based on their perception and it's subjective, there is pieces of the puzzle within everybody's experience. And I think what you said about people's perception at the time of the encounter or abduction or experience is going to dictate the nature of that experience. That's one thing that I found. Also, talking about family history, a lot of the people who have encounters or abductions seem to experience paranormal activity from a young age. You mentioned the genetic thing. This Rh negative blood type comes out a lot. And oddly enough, a lot of these people have family ties to very high level military personnel at times. So there's another data point to add. So it's very interesting what the individual can tell us about the phenomena and the similarities, right?
Right. Yeah, the similarities between the individuals points to a pattern of I would say both manipulation
Mm.
and as well as predisposed for contact. And I think we're not spending enough scientific attention examining these people and trying to understand why they're so predisposed to contact. We have an article on the website called Alien Abductions, The Switch, which we're going to keep talking about because we think that one's really important. And it's based off of a study that happened in Brazil. And they went down there and tested all these people who had experienced something like alien abductions. And they found that they all had a similar brain activity going on. It was in their prefrontal cortex where they were hyper aroused and there was a 40 hertz signal. That seems to be a necessary component before one of these intense contact encounters. And I think that there's a couple different ways that that could happen. You could be genetically more predisposed to get into that state.
Mm-hmm.
But then what they found, especially with this study, and what I would add, we found in our own research, is that people who continuously put themselves into that state tend to get into it more easily. And paranormal encounters and UAP encounters just start happening more frequently. So you could compare that to CE5, and people have reported a number of both encounters during CE5 and then something following them, like the hitchhiker effect, which is something we spend a lot of time on, and I think doesn't get enough attention. I think it's a key to understanding the UAP mystery.
While we're talking about the phenomena of abduction or people that have intrusive experiences, very negative experiences, we mentioned earlier how a person's perceptions seem to affect the level of the experience, whether it's positive or negative. But there's another factor that often comes up with people who experience very negative or terrifying abductions is they often report human presence or a military presence there as well. Most of the contactees who report very benevolent experiences, they don't seem to be physically being taken anywhere. It seems to be more of a less intrusive consciousness phenomena. I've experienced this through meditation, through psychedelics, and there seems to be a crossover between these altered states and a more positive or benevolent contact, but there seems to be a side that it could point to there is human involvement, there is military involvement or interference to some level. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a, I think, hot button question. It's different. If I make that statement, I want to have proof.
Right.
I think that's why I'm always hesitant to answer that question. It's not that I don't see it. It's not that I don't hear and read those reports. And we were just talking about on our show the Pat Price
Mm.
and that remote viewing event. So when he was viewing that mountain in Alaska, he remote viewing a mountain in Alaska, he thought he saw NHI and humans working together. And he was part of this Stargate Black program, and yet still felt like whatever he saw in that moment put his life in danger. And then Pat Price appears to be murdered like 2 weeks later. So, and then the government burns the body before his family can get there. I mean, that sure looks like there's something really bad going on,
Mm.
but they
Yeah.
burned the evidence before we could get there.
Mm.
So, if that is occurring, and it might be, it is happening with a very small group of people.
Mm.
A very small group of people know about it, and a very small group of people are engaged in it. And that's pretty disturbing.
Well, another disturbing aspect is even with the positive seeming encounters, there seems to be a level of deception and manipulation, even with the most beautiful and positive and beneficial encounters. Either there's bits and pieces of information that end up being not correct, or there's some kind of request that the intelligence wants of the person, and oftentimes it can end up in worse situations than when it started, but it makes me very cautious of interacting with any unseen intelligences just based on the level of manipulation that I see with many people.
I think that's wise. That is very good to be cautious with these beings, these entities. Vallet's book, Messengers of Deception,
Mm.
it's right there in the title. There's been a number of these incidents. Certainly, John Keel thought that the phenomenon was setting people up in the 60s, some of these contactees like Adamski. And he thought that Billy Meyer, he thought the phenomenon was actually having contact with them, and then it would set them up and make them look bad.
Mm.
And we have a well-validated contactee of today with Chris Bledsoe. So,
Right.
and I'm glad that we have him to get some research off of. But his contacts have been interesting because there have been times when it seems like these beings are telling us things and they don't have the words. So
Mm.
sometimes maybe they're lying, they're straight up lying and deceptive, that is clear. And then other times they're using words like heaven or hell because we don't have any other point of reference as humans. They're saying I'm doing this or going here. That's how it seems to me. They maybe gave us concepts of religion in order to give us an idea of what happens outside of our physical reality,
Mhm.
and then are using those concepts to communicate with us.
Mm. There seems to be a level of ego stroking that makes me nervous with a lot of these encounters. You're special, you are chosen, you're here for a divine purpose. That's very common message you hear with a lot of these contactees, but the information or in game is really unclear with what they're trying to accomplish, but it does make me cautious that so many people are this special when it comes to this kind of experience.
Yeah, and I think, and it's interesting that, there's overlaps that we've been exploring between UAP studies and the occult. And like, this
Yeah.
is one of those moments where it becomes at least very apparent to me that there's a massive overlap in the initiation. And so when you're initiated into occult studies, there's a lot of talk about ego and destruction of ego. And certainly when it comes to UAP studies, I felt like it was absolutely necessary to destroy your ego.
Hmm.
And I think that this phenomenon did that for me. And if you have ego, you're screwed
Yeah.
when
Oh,
it comes
yes.
to this phenomenon.
100%.
You are. because that puts you prone to manipulate. Like it makes you very easy to manipulate, and then it seems to react. The phenomenon
Mm,
itself seems to react, and this is where it gets strange. Initially, this is where I thought you were going, is that the phenomenon itself seems to have an ego or a need for some sort of validation,
mm,
dominance, a need to establish control. And when it would be like a private smarting off to a drill sergeant or something like that, right? It needs to show you who's in charge.
mm. And we mentioned many times, we call it the phenomena. Could it be that it is some sort of overarching intelligence that can manifest in different ways depending on the person that it's interacting with or the ideology that it's trying to put across? You can even apply this to, I believe, cryptid encounters, stuff that happens in Skinwalker Ranch, different types of manifestation that seem to be not only occurring in the same area, but at times connected in some ways. So you look at all that together and you have to ask the question, is it all one thing that's being presented in different ways?
Yeah, some interesting theories around my favorite, personal favorite theory that it involves one our overarching control system is that it's a von Neumann probe or von Neumann if you're German. The von Neumann probe would be a probe that contains all of the elements for life on this planet, as well as like all the seeds for our civilization and our species to propagate. And then it would contain some sort of babysitting
Mm,
mechanism that would help us get our civilization back on track to where we are today.
interesting.
Um, yeah, it's a very interesting concept, and this is one that even Avi Loeb, who is the Harvard professor that is in charge of Project Galileo and professor of astrophysics there, this is a theory that he really likes. And there's some interesting theories going around, like Patrick Jackson and the orbs. That's one people may want to look up. He's been looking for patterns in orbs, and the patterns of orbs maybe look like there's a control
Mm,
system there. There's another. What we found at 14 Winds was a periodicity that these things happen on a seeming schedule with intensity. They never stop, but there's peaks and valleys with intensity and frequency of these paranormal and UAP encounters, and they appear to be occurring every 30 years. So that sort of looks like a control system. And we look at all that and say, okay, even with that, me personally, when I look at this phenomenon in totality, what I see is more like different entities or different factions of entities with different agendas and different intelligences interacting with us differently. But I think that that control system speaks to the fact that they have to live with some sort of rules and hierarchy as well.
mm,
And regardless of how they're appearing, whether they're showing up as angels or demons or aliens, they seem to keep indicating that there is a
mm.
hierarchy
Right,
among them.
right.
That doesn't scream control system
Yeah,
to me.
man, it is so interesting. Like I said, the more I find out about this, the more questions I have. But I want to go back to some of the nuts and bolts aspects. You mentioned the craft shape earlier. This is very interesting. What does the craft shape tell us about the phenomena fundamentally?
That's a great question. I don't think we know, but let's talk about what we know about some of the patterns. Orb is the first type that people see the most by far. And I think that that's very telling because often they describe an orb from far away. And as the craft approaches, it gets closer, it becomes more defined and something that looks more
Mm,
spaceshipy. So is it that spaceship? Or was it an orb and as it got closer, it materialized or realized itself? I believe that that is the case. that what we are looking at is quantum energy. It's potential energy would be the right way to say that. And you probably had some of these discussions on your show where so there's potential energy and quantum
Hmm.
superposition. And quantum superposition would be like if I flipped a coin, then the coin in quantum superposition position is both heads and tails, and it's every state of heads and tails in between. Entirely new states of heads and tails that you never thought of. So that's what we're looking at, and physicists today believe that this is the answer to Schrodinger's cat riddle.
Yeah.
That if you sawed the cat in half, the cat is both alive and dead, and everything in between. So they're saying this is the case. Now, this would also explain why, for example, in the Miracle of Fatima, Ariel School incident, numerous other incidents in UFO lore, where two people are looking at the same object and seeing different things. The only mechanism where we've seen that happen is through quantum mechanics.
Something else
So,
that could add to
yeah, go ahead.
that is throughout our history, the phenomena has adjusted itself to the collective consciousness, to the level of technology that we're aware of. They seem to be able to shapeshift into things that we are more familiar with at the time. And, you go from the airships and the saucers. Now, like you said, we have these plasma balls and these orbs, things that look like shape shifting balloons that can all of a sudden form into a solid object. So, this would make a
Right.
lot of sense if it's something that, like you said, it is all these things at the same time until maybe it has something to do with our consciousness and perception. It may
Right.
have more of a connection to what we are as a whole than anything. That's another theory, that it's just a part of our collective conscious that manifests in certain ways.
That is what it appears to
Hmm.
be. That is I think that is like the leading theory right now.
Yeah.
Where we have to be a little cautious is that there does involve nuts and bolts
Mm.
craft, and it does involve physical craft. And I have to remind myself of what Isaac Asimov said, that any technology fully realized would look like magic to the end user. So we could be looking at a just extremely advanced set of technology capabilities that are giving us this impression, but based on everything we know, this is what it looks like. They're coming here, their potential energy, they appear to be intelligent. And then even the pilots in the Tic Tac encounter, they describe the craft, and this happens with pilots all the time, that they say, I think that thing was
Mm.
alive.
Yeah.
It's not a pilot. The craft is the intelligence at that point.
Mm.
And this, I think, has been talked about across the board. Not one time have I read or heard an account of someone telling us what the controls were to pilot a
Mm.
UFO.
Well, you mentioned there is physical aspects to this. Let's talk a little bit about the metamaterials that certain individuals have found, whether it's an implanted unknown object or debris that may have been left behind by a sighting. There are pieces of this that we do have access to, but once we hear something about it, it seems to disappear. We never get the scientific results from this stuff. We never hear anything else about it once the initial reports come out. What do you think is going on with these metamaterials?
Well, a couple things there. I think as far as just to address your last point first, the, a couple things as far as the material and the research that happens after the study. I think that points to a larger problem with ufology. It points to a larger problem with where would this research go in the public that would allow it to go further. The DoD has a immediate need for this, so they've got money to put into it. It's impossible to get universities to take this subject seriously and get money behind it. So in the public, we're generally relegated to asking millionaires to fund projects like Brandon Fugel, Bob Bigelow, and then it's up to them how much they want to share. So that's part of the problem with getting more evidence of the material analysis. But as far as what exists, there's a piece you can go look at from the Kingman crash, and that had a material analysis done. It was found to have at least one anomalous uh, aspect to it. Gary Nolan put out a scatter plot of a. Gary Nolan is a scientist that's been looking into this from Stanford, and he put out a scatter plot, and the scatter plot showed an inhomogeneous mixing of the metal that would seem to indicate that someone is putting this together on the fly. So they're not creating this with ore and minerals the way we would. They're just winking it into existence because the isotopic ratios are at a level that are so high. We don't have that type of material here on Earth. So if it was gold or copper, it would be a purity of gold or copper that we just don't have. And this indicates that these things are creating this stuff at the atomic level. They're engineering at the atomic level, which is far beyond our capabilities today.
So you're saying they're basically using materials that are already in existence here, and they're forming these devices just with their mind or with their consciousness?
That's correct. Yeah, they're using material from our environment. And Keel thought this many years ago. I think we're just proving it today, where it's they're using materials from our environment, and then they're collecting or combining them in new and unique ways.
I think I heard you say that this may explain the alien bodies that we found, the X-rays. It could explain how these bodies are put together.
Absolutely. So those bodies, and I think we're referring mostly to the Peruvian bodies, which at this point have been studied by 60 or 70 experts, and they're all saying they're non-human anomalous bodies. There have been a couple experts who have not reviewed the bodies physically, who have tried to debunk them, and the mainstream news just keeps talking about those couple of guys. They're not talking about the 60 or 70 PhDs that have looked at those bodies and said, and they're not talking about what they're finding, to your point. Like, very difficult to get this information to come forward. And that's deliberate, obviously. What we're seeing, and it's suppressed. And so, yeah, those bodies appear to be manufactured to me. They look like something you would send that needs to reproduce without they were capable of reproduction even on their own. They laid eggs.
Interesting.
Yeah. Wow. And then if you needed something that was a vehicle, it was more like a vehicle, like an orb vehicle. And those bodies, to me, appeared to be manufactured and disposable. They also don't match. So that would indicate they're not like a male and female reproducing in a normal way. The bodies are all over the place and in wildly unique scientific ways. Not like they were just put together on eBay.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the level of disclosure we're at right now and what could be behind it all? I have to take a look at the characters that have hit the scene, former counterintelligence, Lou Elizondo, all these people who used to be involved either with intelligence or military that are now the quote-unquote UFO spokespeople that are disclosing all of this stuff to us. I have always had a distrust of our government and a lot of these high-level military people, especially if they are self-proclaimed counterintelligence. I've heard him talk about in interviews before that he is still doing counterintelligence within the UFO community, whatever that means. So I have to take a lot of what's said in these congressional hearings and from these individuals with a grain of salt, but I know that there's always a level of truth that is put out with all of these operations. So there has to be something in there that we can take as a valid piece of information to add to everything. What are your thoughts on this disclosure right now?
Right. I think what you said last is probably most important. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So it's clear that Lou Elizondo is still tied to the government. But what would we expect this to look like in the public? I would ask people to say that. Instead of rejecting everyone that comes forward from the government, say, what would that perfect government witness look like? To me, Grush is pretty close to a perfect government witness. And by the way, it slipped out at the Soul Foundation that Grush had firsthand knowledge. So he was pretty close to a perfect witness. But then they will go to jail. There's if they say something that they signed an NDA against and they don't have the right whistleblower protections, they will go to jail. And the UFO community and the social media community will not give a shit.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So we're asking them to throw away their lives for a 5-minute dopamine hit on Twitter. It's not going to happen. So I think we need to be measured. We do need to be cautious because we know for a fact that they've been lying to us for 80 years. So everyone that comes forward deserves skepticism. And with that said, we can validate what they say. We can pursue what they say. And Congress has to do that. I think Congress is going to have to use the power of the purse. It's their only real leverage. And these are military we're talking about. They're not going to respect anything but strength. They don't care about your rules.
All across the news, there are many talking about another uptick in UFO sightings, especially just after this election. Now, I can't confirm or deny that there actually has been an uptick, but you immerse yourself in this research. Has there been any unusual uptick in activity that you found lately?
There has. I would say there's been an uptick that started years ago. It'd be difficult to say that it started during COVID because there is a great paper by Dr. Mark Rodiger about UFO sightings in COVID, and they did increase. But as he points out in the paper, there was a lot more people looking at the sky.
Right.
So we're not entirely sure that that was the catalyst, but pretty much since then, it started getting much more frequent. There's also the public awareness that has grown. But as we just discussed, there's a consciousness aspect to this. And even when we briefly mentioned the hitchhiker effect, and people feel this way about skinwalkers, they're like, don't talk about the skinwalker. Native Americans will tell you, don't talk about the skinwalker. Like, they're not joking. And there's a belief among some of us that that involves quantum entanglement, that your awareness, and the people who have been affected by the hitchhiker effect from Skinwalker Ranch have said this, that they're afraid to talk about it. And they're afraid that it involves quantum entanglement. Their awareness of it allows this to become more present. So is that what we're seeing? What is the reason for the frequency? That's the more prosaic reason, but let's talk about some of the crazier reasons. And some of those crazier reasons might be, first of all, there is I will call it a prophecy because that's what it is, a prophecy going around right now. And it says in 26 or 27, 2026 or 2027, that there's going to be a mass contact event, a big pivotal change between us and the public and this phenomenon. And that's been said by a few contactees that are credible, John Ramirez, Chris Bledsoe, and I've heard it from 4 or 5 different sources now. So I don't dispute or I don't disbelieve that the phenomenon has said that to people. But what I would go back to, and it's good that we talked about it in the beginning, was what John Keel said, where he said it was setting all these contactees up to pull the rug out from under him and make them look like hoaxsters, which in turn allows the phenomenon to go right back into the closet and hide. So we got to be a little careful. We just be watchful of that. And then if we're right and it's on this 30-year schedule, then the last 30-year hit was in the 90s, and that was when Skinwalker Ranch and the Paranormal Ranch explosion. That's what we're calling it. The hit before that would have been the 1960s, which I think we're all aware of a lot of the crazy UFO activity that was happening then. We're almost exactly 60 years from that, right?
I think it's very interesting what you said, that our awareness of the phenomena may be perpetuating it in some ways. It seems like the more we find out about our reality, right now we're comparing it to a simulation because that's the level of technology that we can understand. Simulation theory is huge right now because of the high strange nature of our reality and how it reacts to our awareness of things, how our perception can shift reality in certain ways. If whatever this intelligence is just the collective, could it be that it is just nudging itself to evolve using these techniques of contact?
It's possible. I've heard some researchers who are really into this theory, and it's becoming even bigger right now because, and I'll tell you, I think the main source of this theory among like the big heads, the influencers, the journalists, is the Monroe Institute. And the Monroe Institute, Robert Monroe, he's the only one in the West that I know of that mapped the consciousness realm, if you will. And that was his conclusion, was that we are all experiencing something from this giant proto-intelligence, and it's learning through all of our experiences. And maybe, but I would also say that we're now trying to answer the mystery of life when we're really trying to figure out what UFOs are.
Something
And that makes me wonder if I'm being
Well,
deceived.
something else about that, the phenomena always seems to be multiple steps ahead of our awareness of it. If we become
Right.
aware of a certain level, then it shifts and changes into something that we can't even
Right.
recognize, and this tends to keep occurring. So the question then becomes, will we ever be able to understand this, or is this a mystery we're not supposed to?
Sure. I think that's a great, it's a question we're all wondering. But I think the answer is that we can understand it better than where we are today. And that understanding it better than where we are today will unlock capabilities within us on an individual level and on a societal level. So it's worth it.
Now, have you
regardless of
personally
whether-
had
yeah.
any strange encounters, unexplained interactions, UFO sightings, things of that nature?
I have, and I wouldn't say I've had anything definitive happen to me until I started researching UFO.
Right.
Until I was a year into the research and totally obsessed, and then stuff started to happen.
Would you be able to share any
And
of
that
the
is kind of-
occurrences?
Well, I've talked about the one a few times, and I think that's the one that the people are most interested in. And that was I was working on a contact experiment, and it was in the early days of AI, so I hadn't completed it yet, and I hadn't completed the experiment. I hadn't gotten it ready, and I realized that if I sent out a signal that I was going to need something to interpret it. And mind you, at this point, I think that I'm going to contact extraterrestrials. And so as I'm trying to create something to interpret the signal that I wouldn't know how to interpret, I started to make an AI. And like this was, I think ChatGPT was on version 2 and it wasn't publicly released yet. So LLMs were not really public yet at that time. And it was way ahead of me technically. And I was like, how am I going to do this? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm looking for UFOs and something came along and helped me out um, for a couple hours, and it allowed me to complete the experiment and build this AI that I still couldn't build today. And yeah, that was the biggest, weirdest one. I have seen an orb since
Mm.
then. So I don't. Those are the most
Right
definitive.
on. Well, this has been a great conversation, and we are living in incredible times. I am hoping that researchers like yourself will continue to bring this incredible information. Now, as far as your research goes, is there anything upcoming that you are going to be looking into? Anything's in the works?
Yeah, we're doing some pretty interesting stuff. I really want to keep dialing in on the formula for a paranormal encounter
Mm.
and what are those characteristics? What are those beakers? First of all, what are those different components that create a paranormal encounter? And then what are the conditions where one happens?
Mm.
That would allow us to both communicate with the phenomenon and prevent it from impacting people who are affected by malevolent
One of those
hauntings. We can
parameters that
figure
we
that out.
didn't touch on that I would like to real quick is childhood trauma. This seems to be a
Hmm.
huge trigger for
Yeah.
activity and encounters later in life, right?
Yeah, childhood trauma. And on that same note, one that I have been disturbed by recently is that negative entity hauntings, like demonic type hauntings, seem to happen a lot to women who were victims of
Mm,
abuse that have children.
interesting.
And that, doesn't sound like a control system to
Mm,
me. Sounds like something evil out there, but who knows? It also it could be the residual energy left over from something so traumatic that
mm.
manifests. It's difficult to say, but yeah, childhood trauma and any kind of trauma, adult trauma can
Right.
also do it as
Well,
well.
I love the work you're doing. If you think about it, 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have these base parameters that most people could understand so that we can work with. Now it's very easy for people to get access to this information and have a basic understanding of what we're talking about. Maybe 10 years from now, it'll be so advanced that, like you said, we will have a better understanding of everything. We probably won't have all the answers, but we may be a little closer. So, Ram, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Before you go, remind everyone how they can find all your content.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find everything we do at 14wins.com. We do have a Facebook group, but it's mostly there for to get notified of things that we publish. And we're also have all of our episodes up on YouTube if you want to get notified there. We're on all the streaming apps. And the website is the main thing. I would invite people to go there and look at the sources. That's what we're most proud of. That's what we have to share is, like you said, there's a lot of information out there now.
Excellent. Ram, thank you so much. Definitely love to talk again in the future. Much more we can get into. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. Hello, friends. Have you tried what may be the most powerful antioxidant known to man? C60 PurplePower. My C60 story has led me to great health mentally and physically. It's helped me personally lose weight, have more energy, and fight aging in general. You can also get C60 for your pets. Our dogs love it. They may live forever. Go check out C60 for yourself. If you use the link right in the description, you're going to get 10% off your order plus free shipping. They have some incredible new products like gummies, oils, and much more. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history. Hello, friends. At some point in our journeys, we all need guidance and direction. One thing I've learned along the way is that there are many ways to connect with our soul mission. Jennifer Halcame offers over 30 years experience with intuitive tarot, life coaching, and energy and attachment clearing. She helps others with energetic blocks become aligned with their soul mission. She offers one-on-one or online Zoom sessions, and cases are assessed on an individual basis, and she works with everyone truly in need. You can email her now to set up a free consultation at jenniferhalcame@gmail.com or through Facebook Messenger. All those links are right in the description.